As many of you mentioned, and for obvious reasons, this has been a real transition time from the Gregorian calendar of 2022 into 2023. And for many of us, it's been a time, of the holidays too, and a time to kind of evaluate. And for many people, make New Year's resolutions, figure out what's going on in their life, changes, etc. So Deb and I do have some tradition around the holiday. If you could mute yourself, whoever's not mute. Okay. So I will say that there's a movie that I like to watch almost every Christmas called Scrooge. Do people know that one with Albert Finney? It's actually from 1970. I looked it up. Somehow I thought it was 1980. It's a musical set, based on Ebenezer Scrooge and being visited by the three ghosts of Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas future. Should I say a little bit of the story, or do you have a sense? Right, Scrooge is a money-grubbing, bah humbug kind of guy, and then the ghosts visit him, and then he, realizes that he could be a different kind of person, more giving, more about connecting. And so I like to watch that one. And the funny thing, I think it used to play when I was growing up in the United States, when I was in the United States. Around the holidays, they would show certain movies every year. Like, so I think that was one of the ones, so it's from my childhood. Deb likes to watch It's a Wonderful Life from 1946, right, with James Stewart, right? You guys know that one? Right, where he, goes through his life, and then he might go into jail, and he's trying to help people all along, but he has ambitions for himself, personal ambition, but he's always ends up taking care of the credit union that his father started. And then at some point he might have to go to jail because his uncle lost some money, and there's a money grubber in there too that actually stole it kind of inadvertently. And so then he wants to kill himself. And a angel who's having a hard time, a secondary angel, what was his name? Clarence, right? Clarence, yeah. Is trying to become a full-blown angel, and I guess he's not so great at it, but they send him on this mission. So then, his whole thing is to try to convince George Bailey, who James Stewart's playing, to see the value of his life, right? So watching these movies, and then some other things came up, and it really got me thinking that at this time of the year, many of us, right, really are reviewing our lives. Or more specifically, we're reviewing the story of our life. What have I done? Who am I? Who do I want to be? What's going to happen? There's a sense of I can do something, or what do I want to do about my life? And I will say that this whole idea of a story, when I first came to practice in Soto Zen, there was this really sense of a dissing of stories, right? That because there's most stories, and broadly this is true, when we have stories, most of the stories are about ourselves. I'm the central character, and this is how we think in general. We put ourselves in the center, and then things happen. And so the whole idea, of course, in Buddhism is that there's no solid self, right? So there's this whole thing that when you have a story about yourself, then it's going to lead you to suffering. And so don't have a story. Let go of your story. It's like a big thing. Let go of your story. 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 And you know, it has its value without a doubt. And at times it, you know, could be used not so wisely. Like if someone is suffering, you know, a death in the family, some other forms of having a hard time, be it racially or homophobia or some sense of not being reflected or understood about what's going on in your life, then saying, well, it's just a story is not helpful. Mm-hmm. So I really got the sense that, in fact, it was less, you're not practicing well if you keep holding on to stories. I myself feel that we actually practice to know our stories better. In fact, to know them really well. And we practice to know them for various reasons, which I'm going to get into. So first, what is a story? In the broader sense of Buddhism, anything you tell yourself is a story. Any ideas you have is a story, wouldn't you say? Right? So on a certain level, we can understand it broadly. And I will say that stories include imagination. And you say, you know, recently I was talking to my sister about an album that my birth mother made of pictures, you know, and I would say, oh, this is blah, 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 blah. And she said, no, that's not it. It's like this, you know, and then we're like, I don't know, you know, and I'm like, well, that's my memory versus your memory. And so stories of ourselves, by this, it doesn't mean that there might not be facts or validity. And in a lot of ways, stories or truth is something that is agreed upon by two or more people. I think classically is the definition of truth, right? Of relative truth, right? Remember absolute truth? We don't really know what absolute truth exactly is, because once we give words to it, then it becomes relative. So all stories have imagination. Right? And so the issue is, what is the imagination in service of? So we are studying the Paramita, some people, and there'll be a whole other one, and another group starting this month. And we are using a different book than the AA group, but the World Could Be Otherwise by Norman Fisher on the 6 Paramitas. And he past abbot of Zen Center, and he's a poet, so and an essayist, so he knows a lot about stories. Right? Is someone there? Okay. So he talks about imagination, and he says imagination is powerful. It creates its own self-validating truth strong enough to effect inner and outer transformation. It's essential to our humanness, he says. He says the Bible and other religious texts, folktales, myths, rhyme, poems, plays, novels, anecdote, music, ritual, pictures, dreams, all imaginative productions rise up from the unconscious to expand the soul, to help us feel who we really are and what the world really is. They'll help us move beyond the habitual one-dimensional perspective of our outer perceptions and fearful emotions. Imagination isn't an escape from reality. Imagination deepens and enriches reality, given texture, depth, dimension, feeling, and possibility. The truth is, all that is creative and ennobling in us ultimately sources in the imagination. Without imagination, reality is flat, too matter of fact, lacking in color and fervor, to go beyond the possible to the impossible, we need to imagine it. So our aspirations takes imagination. Some of you have heard me talk about emptiness as a sense of possibility, right? Emptiness, so possibility takes the imagination. Now, the other thing, of course, though, is imagination can go too far. We kind of have a sense of that in the United States these days, right? Our sense of truth is really very flexible these days, and there's a lot of ways of people using imagination in service of whatever their plan is. And so as a spiritual practice, right, I think we need to really have a sense of how do we use our imagination and in service of what. He says here, as he continues, that says we should be careful about imagination, especially in terms of spiritual practice, right? For instance, for many people, religion, which has a lot of imagination, right? It's myths and stories about how creation comes to being, or, you know, Jesus or Buddha or Bodhidharma, whoever is your, you know, that you look up to, or we use in religious settings as a way to promote the teachings or to make points about the teaching, right? So he says religion is supposed to help us live more completely within our human imagination. Right? In doing this, it provides a counterforce to the gravity of a human world that has always been full of trouble and strife. And so on one level, that's, I think, a useful way of using imagination. Now, he does talk about how the English poet Coleridge, right, talks about imagination in terms of primary and secondary. And the primary imagination is the living power and prime agent of all human perception, and as a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite, I am. Right? So the primary imagination then creates the world we live in. And this isn't actually too far from Buddhism. We actually in our Zen school, in our lineage of Zen, do have the aspect in which there is a sense in the Yogacara school that reality is simply mind created, right? By that it doesn't mean reality doesn't exist, but our understanding of the world is through our own, perception. And that's why we have to be careful of knowing how we perceive. We create the world in the way that we perceive, right? Or more correctly, in our explanation of how we share what the world is our creating it as we see it from our point of view. And so we practice to realize that, because it then tells us that we're limited. It's only limited from my point of view. And so we become more inclusive of other points of views, right? I've talked about that ad nauseum other times. So fantasy then is one in which I think when he talks about it with Shelley, is that fancy is imagination that is suspect. All right, he used the words fancy, not fantasy, right? So when the imagination takes us somewhere where it doesn't have a basis in which it either presents us in some ways of, let's say, connection or how to live better among each other, and it's very self-driven or ego-driven or towards disconnection, then we want to be really careful about that kind of imagination, right? All right, there's a lot more I could say. Now, of course, the Bodhisattva ideal is exactly that. It's based on imagination, right? Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Right? Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. Right? You say the Bodhisattva vows and you're like, yeah. So why do I say it? Because it's about our aspiration, which is really an idea, which is an imagination. And so our practice is not actually to achieve our aspirations. Our practice is actually to stay in alignment with our aspiration. Right? It's a pointer towards a way of imagining a world in which there's equality, there's connection, there's sense of inclusiveness, different ways of talking about that, but it's a way in which we hold our ideals in a way that connects us and in a way that is towards non-harming, which obviously is the biggest part of Buddhism. Okay? All right. Now, for us, one way that I want to talk about how we then think about our stories, right? Or a way of framing our stories in a way that doesn't take it to the point in which it becomes fantasy, right? So the way to do that is hold it in certain kind of framing. And I think as Buddhists, the most fundamental framing are the precepts. And so we always begin in the precepts. Now, do you guys remember the precepts? Right? Y'all here, I think most of you anyway, have taken the precepts with me or, studied the precepts. And so what are the 3 ways that we work with the precepts? Do you guys remember? The 3 broad ways of working with the precepts. First, the not version. Why the precepts in the not version? Restraint. Okay. All right. Maybe you guys have beginner's mind. Okay. Remember the 3 ways broadly that I frame how we work with the precepts. First is restraint or renunciation is the classic. Restraint. This is why not killing, not stealing, all that. It's in the not, right? So remember what is the thing behind the not? What is the quality or the aim of the not? So we can remember our purpose, our aspiration.
Non-harming? I don't.
No, not the things themselves, but the quality behind it. So we practice restraint so that we remember our purpose. Our purpose is not to kill, not to steal, right? So the not reminds us this is the reason why I have this precept, right? And also it stops us right away, right? When we're thinking, oh, okay, not killing. Okay, am I killing here? What might be life taking away when I do this? Remember this? All this? Okay. So the second way is what? More beginner's mind. The second way is mindfulness. We practice it with it as a mindfulness practice. Right? Not just like, okay, I got to stop not doing that. But I want to be aware. I want to, so in the being more aware of what it is, you want to focus on what is the positive value, right? So not killing, what's the positive value? I just said it. Life sustaining. Is it enlivening versus deadening? That could be another way of putting it. So we want to practice in a way that helps us cultivate connection that is life-sustaining. Okay? And then the last is we practice to know that neither purpose, so the second is I call focus, right? We focus to remember what we need to, the positive is We are mindful because we're cultivating like the opposite or more enlivening, right? So that's the focus. So the third way is classically called like Buddha nature, right? When neither purpose nor focus are separate. I don't always have to keep thinking, what's my purpose in practicing this precept? And how do I focus this? It becomes kind of integrated. Another way to put it is integrated. Now, Norman Fisher, I will say, talks about it as restraint, is his first one. And he says that noticing and checking conscious and unconscious selfishness, which is counterproductive to real self-love and love of others. Second is the development of virtue. I call that mindfulness or cultivation practice. He calls it cultivating positive qualities, matched by outer conduct that go beyond mere restraint to encouraging and increasing an inner passion for goodness and caring. And the third is the full bodhisattva joy in benefiting others. That's his third. Loving and helping without a sense of restraint or need to develop virtue. Now, that sounds nice. Sounds nice. But it really is hard to do, for sure. Now, I will say a way to help you next time, if my 3 thing doesn't help, is that remember in the Bodhisattva 16 precepts, the first is the 3 refuges, right? I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. They're the 3 ways in which you're always supported. The fundamental support of Buddhism is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And that's available to everyone, right? And they're not really even vows. They're just a knowing. You actually vow to remember that these are there for you. That's what the vow really is. So it's not a vow. I'm not vowing to be Buddha necessarily, or to be Dharma, or to be Sangha, but how do I vow to keep on engaging and knowing these, okay? And so then the second is called the 3 pure precepts. Classically, not to do harm, to do good, and the Mahayanas version, the third one, is to live for the benefit of all beings. In the Theravada tradition, it's to get rid of all your kleshas, right? Or to be able to let go of your karma and never have to live in karma again. So that's Theravada. But the Mahayanas is to, and by that I don't mean it's a diss, it's just a way of framing it. So Norman says those are actually like the 3 purposes of the precepts. To live to do good, to cultivate non-harming, and then to live for the benefit of all beings, essentially. Okay, so that might help you to remember the 3 purposes. All right. So you could think of it as, I'm calling them kind of like the formats today of how to work with a way to reframe or recalibrate our lives at this time in which we think, oh, New Year resolution, how could I make shifts in my life? How could things be different? So remember that in the first, in terms of knowing the purpose and the renunciation and the relinquishment kind of practice, is that we really see our life as a container, right? And we want to see it as a container of how do we hold our intentions and our values. Now, for most of us, in a way, it's I think it's the first step in actually engaging deeply in practice, in the insight part of practice, right? Beyond all the calming stuff, in the Vipassana broadly as an insight, where you really go, what the fuck am I doing with my life? What is happening in my life? What am I going to do? Like, how am I living it? And in a way, around this time is that's what we do. We go, okay, last year is like this. What caused me more harm? What the fuck did I do or didn't do? What will be helpful? What changes do I need to make to realign into my values, right? Where do I need more integration of what's important to me? I asked you that in your meditation, right? So, and for many of us, that actually involves looking at the stories we hold about our lives. The story that I'm like this, I'm an impatient person. The story that I'm like this, oh, you know, I have bad luck. Bad things always seem to happen to me. Whatever your stories are, you're like, oh, my life is like this, right? Why don't I have the job I want? Or how can I get the job I want? Or the partner, or the house, or the whatever it is, that's your thing, right? So in a way, we want to hear the story and know the stories because they reflect how we think about ourselves and our lives. And in some ways, we need to see what is the errors of my way, right? What have I done that is not working or isn't towards the purpose of my life or life as I would like it to be, right? And part of that has to do with seeing how we were taught what our purpose of our life is and is it really true anymore? Now, for instance, to go back to our holiday movies, Scrooge, right? He's, I would say, the epitome of self-focus. And then, Scrooge in the version I saw has you understand, his father something was wrong with his father where he was angry all the time or something. He never brought him home. He was left at the school all the time, right? So he didn't trust people. He actually seemed really like he didn't know how to be with people very well. It started out, remember the Ghost of Christmas Past showed him how he had community, he had fun, and then how that isolation of himself created this person. And he was really poor, right? But he enjoyed himself. And then he saw how he put money before relationship. And so we do need to see, even though it might be understandable how we've come to where we are, but where is it that we have perceptions about ourselves and our lives that is not useful anymore, right? And in fact, perhaps keeps on harming us or others in our lives. Or George Bailey was conditioned to be overly focused on others, on doing the right thing, on other people's needs before his own, right? Like his brother was supposed to take over for him. He gave it up the first time and didn't go off to college to save the credit union because Potter was going to take over. And then, but even gave his college money to his brother so his brother could go to college. But then, his brother came back and got married and got a good job offer. So let's show that moment in which he was like, and then he made the decision, and us watching the movies see different parts of the story. And in a way, this is what we need to do. We need to keep revisiting our stories about our lives because we might have a different take on it now or points where we see it. And so he had to learn that actually, perhaps, one thing he learned is that where is it that even though he was taught to give himself up, right, or to do the right thing, what is it that is the result? What does he have now? right? For him, that story, the way I saw it this time, that what he has now is what he needs to remember as the richness in his life, not money. Right? I mean, they're kind of the same, but from different angles, right? And in fact, you know, he was willing to give up his life because he couldn't live up to his idea that he could save the credit union, right? He was gonna die. Like his big thing that the angel gave him was that I wish I had never lived. I know I've been in parts of my life, I was like, I wish I had never lived. Maybe to the point of saying, oh, I'm not going to live. And some of us have gone to that point. And so we have to be reminded, what is here that is worth living, as opposed to the idea of what makes life worth living. So the key, of course, is the keep on reviewing our stories to be aware, have we misperceived? Or where, by that I mean not misperceive as in saw wrongly, but seeing in a way that our conditioning holds the perception that's no longer. It could be misperceived as just misunderstood or didn't quite get it. And it can be a misperceive as we keep holding the same conditioning, the same ideals that no longer serve us. So we need this practice of cultivation, of mindfulness, to really help us to keep on focusing and being careful of how we work with our stories, right? Many of us just want to change by thinking differently, but does that really work? No. If it did, I mean, it can work, and our perceptions can change, for sure, for sure. But it isn't enough to change our perception. We have to find ways in which we practice changing our behavior, or the way we can keep on validating and cultivating and validating the perceptions that are useful to us now. It's not enough to say that is the one I don't want. It also helps to know, okay, this is the direction I want to go here, right? And how do I do that? So the precepts also help us to do that, right? And one way it helps is saying, okay, refocus, and then now, what is your mindfulness practice? How can you cultivate the things that help you redirect and stay going towards the aspiration that you're after? So we reevaluate, we refocus what's important to us now, and knowing we have the means to do it in an enlivening way. In a way, we could say we are practicing at this stage to see what is the meaning of my life as I'm in it. In some ways, our practice is to see how we lived a life we inherited, be it from our family, our culture, systems. How do we live our life by being in it? And it's also more broadly as practice. Remember, this is why our practice is so much where we don't talk like we're, I think I feel sad. Do you feel sad or don't you feel sad, right? So we practice to be in our lives, and including that we are the story, that we actively can create our stories. I know it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. And we don't create our own stories until we know that we can. And in fact, that we are, that we have the agency, we have the means. It doesn't mean it will only be my effort. It will probably need help. It probably need others to help you. or to do it in a very intentional way. So, ironically, I think, to practice from the sense of Buddha nature is to arrive at the fact that I have stories, I need to be aware of the stories, and I need to be actively participating with the story, in the story, be the stories. As I was writing this talk, I had the title, and I was writing, because now I'm trying to, my memory is going. And so I was like, A to Z, the date. And then I put 2022, of course, right? As opposed to 2023. Now that's a story of a year. And of course, year is a story, mind you. 2023 is a story, right? Because what is it? It's like 4,000, I don't know, I can never remember my lunar years. 4,096 or something is in our 500, I don't know, in the many thousands, right? So whatever system, or if you do, I don't know, what is it now? Sagittarius, that's a kind of yearly thing, right? Is it Sagittarius? I don't know if you do the astrology thing, right? Capricorn, okay, right? So in a way, it just reminds us we're always living in a story. And do we remember what story that we are living in, that we're agreeing to live in? All of us today, because many of us at Happy 2023 have agreed, this is our story today, right? That the year is 2023. And that's okay. A story is a story that we agree on here. And we have to remember then that we're in the midst of rewriting our stories all the time. We're always rewriting it. And so the key is, what is the intention behind the story that you're writing? What is the quality as you write and is behind the writing of the story? We're always reframing our stories. And so are we reframing in a way that is enlivening, that's about connection? What is the purpose? What's important to you? So we want to wake up to being in the story of our life. That's the title of this talk. Waking up to being in the story of our lives. Then I thought maybe it's waking up to be in the story. I don't know, being a bee sounds better, right? Because I was thinking, sometimes, otherwise I'm 58. I've had 57 seasons of my story. If this was if the story of Lien was a streaming series, I've already had 57 seasons. Right? Sometimes I forget. I just watch my story. I'm very fascinated. I binge watch my story all the time. And there's 57 seasons of it. So it's a long, I've been watching it a long time. So again, we want to really be clear I think we need to be clear of our story, the intentions of our story, and the quality of our stories, and how do we really flesh it out? How do we enact our stories? And then what is our story in service of? Thank you very much for listening to my story today. All right, any question, comments, any thoughts you want to share? And we can go into the next story, which is we give our merit away. Merit's a story too, by the way.
Very timely.
Thank you.
Do we have time for that?
Yeah.
How is merit a story?
How is what?
Merit a story.
Oh, merit a story? Yeah. Oh, well, merit's a story because, in Buddhism, in Buddhism, in the karma, in the story of karma, or in the explanation of karma, when you do wholesome things, you get merit for wholesome things in your next life. Then Mahayanas came along, Bodhidharma in particular, or the story of Bodhidharma. Don't forget, Bodhidharma perhaps was a real person, but all the stories of his is about him is probably not about the person. Is that actually in Mahayanas, there is no merit, right? Because we always are doing it for others, and so there's no merit for me. So merit then is a story, right? Because it's just something we say that we will get. But then ironically, even though there are no merit, we give it away, right? So it's just this really kind of convoluted, right? I mean, that's why, remember Dogen says, those who are deluded think they are enlightened. Those who are enlightened know they're deluded. So one way to purify that is for any delusion I have merit, I will give it away. That's really what we're doing. Monday, the last thing every Monday. Okay. All right, let's share that story together.